Good evening and welcome to the University of Evansville. My name is Abigail Whirling and I'm the Vice President for Development and Alumni Relations. We are so pleased to have you here this evening, particularly on the first day of spring. Who would know it? We're pleased to have you here this evening for State of Our Union, Making Sense of Current Affairs, presented by the Patricia Snyder Concert and Lecture Series. In my role as Vice President for Development, it is a true pleasure to thank the Snyder family for the Snyder Concert and Lecture Series, made possible through an endowment from the late Patricia H. Snyder, trustee and longtime friend of the University of Evansville. The series was created in 1997 to bring speakers and performers of national and international renown to Evansville at no cost to the public. The concerts and lectures in this series span a wide variety of topics and are aimed at both the Evansville and campus community. We are so grateful to Patricia Snyder, her son Norm, and his wife Susan for sustaining this fund here at the University of Evansville. If you've joined us for a Snyder concert or lecture in the past, we've had a lot of fun with this series. This time a year ago, we welcomed musician Doc Severinsen from The Tonight Show. Boy, that was a lot of fun. We'll never forget his energy and spunk. And tonight, we're very excited to welcome Indiana's beloved former Senator, Richard Lugar. Now, to introduce our keynote conversation, there are so many things I could say that I'm proud of this gentleman for, but probably the thing I'm most proud of is he's one of our own. I'd like to now introduce University of Evansville alumnus, the Honorable Mayor Lloyd Winnecke.
Thank you, Abigail, and good evening, everyone. Again, I'd like to express my thanks to the Snyder family, and especially the late Patricia Snyder for her vision in providing this opportunity for the citizens of Evansville. I have the great honor tonight to introduce our two speakers, and what an honor it is. First, Dr. Tom Kazee, the University of Evansville's 23rd president, at least for a few more weeks. He'll be retiring after this academic year after having served 8 years as president. Before becoming a university president, Dr. Kazee was a political scientist, and this event is in his honor of academic career, such as at Tulane University, Davidson College, University of the South, and Furman University, as well as his time here at UE. Dr. Kazee also teaches here on campus, and this semester is teaching a course on the American presidency. We thank Dr. Kazee for his years of service to the University of Evansville in the academic area and for his great leadership here in the city of Evansville. It's also my pleasure to introduce our esteemed former Senator Richard Lugar. Senator Lugar first served on the Indianapolis Board of Public Education and then 2 terms as mayor of Indianapolis. He served in the United States Senate for 6 terms from 1977 to 2013, focusing on critical issues such as food security, nuclear non-proliferation, energy independence, and free trade. He is now the president of the Luger Center, a nonprofit organization based in Washington, which seeks to educate the public, global policymakers, and future leaders on critical issues such as food and energy security, controlling weapons of mass destruction, and effective governance. We are honored to host Senator Lugar here in our city. It was a great time at dinner tonight. I want to tell you, you are in for a great treat. Please join me in welcoming Senator Richard Lugar and Dr. Tom Kazee.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I appreciate those kind introductions. And thank you to all of you for being here for this evening conversation about the state of our union. We've had a full day of activities that began with a session here on campus that enabled our students and faculty and staff to come and hear a panel discussion. A number of us who have been involved in studying politics for our careers were able to answer questions and comment on the state of American politics today. And then in the afternoon, and this is certainly a compliment to the senator, he had requested that when he visited the campus, he wanted an opportunity to meet with our students. A group of students without any other interlocutors or intermediaries, just to talk with them about politics and about what their views are. And there was a session this afternoon which went very well. I've talked to a number of students afterward, and they so appreciated someone of the senator's experience and wisdom to talk with them on very much a one-to-one basis. So thank you, Senator, for doing that. What I'd like to do is to begin the conversation this evening with a question that really draws on the vast amount of experience that Senator Lugar has on the political stage, both in the United States and in the world. And this is a question that when I first met the senator back in, I believe, 2010, I was visiting Washington with Jack Barner, who was our Vice President for Development, and the senator graciously and generously allowed us to speak with him for a time. And one of the first questions I asked him was the question that I'll begin with this evening. How is Washington different today than it was during your time in the Senate?
Well, President Kazee, there is a big difference, but let me just say, first of all, that I'm excited to be a part of a ceremony once again applauding your remarkable 8 years at this great university. This is exciting. And I'm honored that we've had dinner with the mayor of Evansville, for whom I have great respect. And I'm just delighted to be in Evansville today to have this chance to be with all of you. Let me just say that the country is not tremendously changed from the time that I served. I looked at a period of 36 years, and obviously there are ups and downs. We had a great recession a few years back, and we've been through various conflicts around the world. But this is a very strong, stable country in comparison to anything else that the world has seen, with a great number of talented people, great resources. The question is always wisdom that is demonstrated by our leadership in using those resources and inspiring people really to move ahead, to provide new jobs, new opportunities, new products, new knowledge about the world. We're in a period, especially now, as we talk about cybersecurity, for example, or all sorts of changes in the scientific world, in which maybe some of the rules of the game that we have felt all along were ones that we worked with may be changing. But I'm optimistic about the status of the country. Having said that, while we are in a new administration, my own views, and this may come forward in the rest of our conversation tonight, is that the President has enormous talents, obviously, as a deal maker, as a person who is a great entertainment figure, person of great vigor and an expression, tremendous energy, but probably comes with some limitations in terms of his background in foreign policy and in many domestic policies. That is, the homework maybe has not been as complete as it ought to be. His experience in public life has been very limited, as a matter of fact. And this has demonstrated itself, I suppose, in ways in which his administration has numbers of gaps. I don't want to go through cabinet by cabinet, but State Department's been in the news in this past week, and people have commented the 7th floor of the State Department has seemed often vacant. The number of assistant secretaries that have been named are often fewer than those that have not been named. We have tens of ambassadors that have not been named. South Korea right now has no U.S. ambassador. In other words, the organization of government the ability to find people, if you've not been in politics for most of your life, or not really acquainted with who's available, has its problems. Even then, why the country remains very strong. The rest of us are doing our work, and we're proceeding right along, and I'm not one that's constantly in some air of pessimism. I just observe that this is a very different kind of administration, and in part it comes from the lack of preparation, really from experience.
Senator, and by the way, we'll have an opportunity for question and answers here as we near the conclusion of the evening. So if you have questions, hold them, and we'll have a chance perhaps for the senator to address them. One of the things, we'll talk a bit more in a moment or two about the Luger Center and what work that organization has done. But you've raised this question of how we work together to solve our problems, and with the new administration, relatively inexperienced in that sort of practiced art of politics. We often hear criticisms that the system is fundamentally gridlocked, very difficult to reach across the aisle to solve these problems. Given your experience on Capitol Hill, what do we need to do to better encourage, to be perhaps a catalyst for that kind of coming together, to setting aside partisan differences to try to solve pressing national problems?
Well, at our Luger Center, our small think tank, we have what's called the bipartisan index. We have rated all the members of Congress in the Senate 1 to 100, in the House 1 to 435, on their basis of reaching across the aisle to get bipartisan support of legislation, or introducing bills to begin with that attract bipartisan support. And this is an attempt really to get that conversation going. A lot of newspapers around the country have looked at what their members are doing. Likewise, members who are getting good ratings from the Luger Center put this in their bios usually because they're proud to be so recognized. But we have a long way to go. We've seen some incremental change in partisanship, but things really hit a bottom, according to our calculations, about 10 years ago, in which the splits were really dynamic. It's not just a recent factor. Mm-hmm. Now, one problem that is soluble, but is not really on the horizon, is in the question of politics and money. Once the Supreme Court ruled that various individuals and groups could make unlimited contributions anywhere in political campaigns. A good many people have taken advantage of that. They feel that, after all, this is the First Amendment, freedom of speech. They ought to be able to use their own money to drop millions of dollars in various campaigns, to create scorecards in which the member of Congress is rated on how many times he or she votes in the right way. And the people who get pretty good scorecards may get millions of dollars in a single congressional campaign, or tens of millions if it makes any difference. Under those circumstances, obviously many members who hope to run for re-election at some point are going to be very cautious about crossing swords with any of these scorecards and the people who have the money. It used to be, when I was most active in politics, that the Republican Party, the Democratic Party, raised money for candidates. And this happened locally, it happened statewide and so forth, not nationally. Well, they still do, but this is often dwarfed by the money which is coming in from other sources. So the political parties play less and less of a role in determining really who's listening to who in this process. I think this has got to be resolved. I hope the Supreme Court will have a case and come to a different decision at some point. But in the meanwhile, there are courageous members of the House and Senate who are prepared really to follow their conscience, follow their best instincts. And I find this amazing, but their numbers are not great. So as a result, we're really tied up in gridlock almost continuously. And if you have a situation such as we have now, most of the legislation going on right now in the Congress. And this is a critical week, as a matter of fact, because the Congress must pass a budget for the year or the government shuts down Friday night. Now, in the midst of this, we're seeing not just money being discussed for budget, but all sorts of different causes as people try to insert amendments into this bill, which must pass, because they do not figure you could, in a legitimate way, have a debate on the merits of a bill. Normally, you have to use at least the cover of something that's got to be done. And I take just as an extreme point of privilege, because I have a farm in Indianapolis, and so I follow the ag newsletters every day. The thing that they're most interested in right now is a situation of people taking their grain, say, to sell it. Now, somebody got something into a bill that said if you take it to a co-op, you get a 20% reduction in taxation on that, as opposed to going to just a regular elevator or wherever you might sell the grain. Well, that was a surprise to farmers all over the country, and they have been adamant in trying to change it. And I don't know whether they're going to get it done, but that's being debated behind the scenes in the midst of this thing. So in other words, we're not having straightforward bills offered and committee hearings and votes in both houses, but as a matter of fact, to get things done in the dark of night, you really need to have sort of the budget, or finally the defense budget, or 2 or 3 things that must pass each year, and this often is about all that is passing.
One of the things that one notices when you're in Washington is that though we as voters out away from the Capitol see this in terms of policy issues or data or such, the fact is these laws, these decisions are being made by people. To what extent do you think we have a culture in Washington that encourages the kind of interaction across the aisle, the partisan aisle, that would enable members of Congress to get to know each other as people, to respect their motivations or not based on their personal interactions? Do we have a culture that encourages that or discourages that?
Our culture has discouraged it more and more. Now, it does so in many ways. First of all, there are many members who have said that they really don't like Washington. They don't want to spend any more hours in Washington each week than is absolutely necessary. So as a result, frequently the House or the Senate might start doing business late Monday night or early Tuesday morning. Might try to finish up their business Thursday night, even at midnight or what have you, so that members can go to the airport and go home. And in other words, members are making a point that they are not Washington bound. They belong to their constituents at home. Now that means they spend less time in Washington. They spend less time seeing their colleagues. And as you've read, many members take this to an extreme and actually sleep in their offices, so they don't have to rent or buy property in Washington and use the shower there in the athletic room. It's an extreme situation, to say the least. When I first went to the Senate, there were many more groups of people who met socially, and there were people who went on trips together, so-called Codels. The Aspen Institute, for years, has had a program of Thursday morning breakfast in which members of both sides of the aisle and both parties, both houses, could hear a speaker and see each other, and then go on about 5 different trips a week each during the year, with their spouses. These were good opportunities to find out who was who might co-sponsor your bills, who might come along with you, and so forth. There were times, when Katharine Graham, published for the Washington Post, had parties, and Shar and I were invited to many of these, And we saw a good number of people from Congress, but others in Washington. But to the extent that all that has been discouraged, the possibilities of people really knowing each other, working with each other, of course, have been fragmented. I hope that will change, but it's not in the foreseeable future.
I was in a conversation earlier today with someone suggested that they thought one of the biggest changes in recent years has been basically some fundamental changes in the way we communicate with each other. And we're talking about social media, for example. In the political context, I think about things like political advertisements. And as you were reflecting on the need for greater bipartisanship, that caused me to wonder how we could create incentives for that. How voters could be caused to reward those members of Congress that reach across the aisle. And one problematic aspect of that, I suppose, is the nature of political advertising, the kinds of attack, negative ads that we see so often that dominate discourse. And certainly those of us here in Indiana know that we're on the verge of a Senate election that I'm sure will be characterized by a great deal of negative advertising, if the past is any indication. Do you have thoughts about political advertising, campaigning, maybe more broadly today?
Well, I've already mentioned that, and this is going to occur in Indiana, as you mentioned, the Senate campaign, that millions of dollars from people outside Indiana are going to come into this state. Already, a good bit of money has come into the state from places outside, not from our parties, but from folks who have particular causes. So long as the Supreme Court position is that this is perfectly legitimate, we're still going to be inundated by these ads. And they become more vicious all the time as people make a career of negative advertising. I advise the students today, for example, and this may be extreme, but I said, listen, I hope many of you at some point consider running for public office. But please, please, keep the record clean from the beginning. In other words, don't do something ridiculous as a student, because there are going to be people who will spend thousands of dollars in so-called negative research. And they're going to find out that at some point in your high school career or your college career, you did this, this, or this, and so forth. And this is then going to be elaborated dramatically in a political ad to indicate what a poor character you have, what a terrible past, all the rest of it. And so that the campaign then is fought over those indiscretions of the teenager, not questions of war and peace or jobs or security or so forth. That's the nature of this business. If you have that much money out and that many ads all of the time, and of course, given the numbers of ways in the social media, quite apart from television in general, that are available for this, is simply endless.
You've mentioned war and peace, so let's shift a bit to talk about foreign policy. Certainly something you had great experience in your time in the Senate. What are the foreign policy issues that concern you most today?
Well, let me just sort of tick off some things that have occurred in the first year of the President's administration. His first trip over to see NATO allies was characterized by the fact that he did not emphasize Article 5. That's the article that says if any of the NATO allies are hit by somebody else, everybody else is mandated to come to the rescue. That, as a matter of fact, has made possible peace in Europe for over 50 years, in a continent that had had no peace at all for a millennium, as well as some security vis-a-vis the former Soviet Union or now Russia. But the President emphasized the fact that these folks were not paying their dues, that they were not holding their fair share, and that we were paying too much. The idea was that, as a matter of fact, we may be less interested in NATO if people are not interested in themselves and so forth. Well, at least, thank goodness, we still are in NATO. It didn't end the question. But the next conference, so-called Paris Agreement, this was an agreement with lots of countries that said we need to take steps as a world to control climate change. And control of CO2 and so forth. Tremendously important, I believe. Now, there may be in the audience tonight people who say, oh, this is not really a problem, that this is simply what nature does, but the majority of scientists now believe that we are, in fact, making a difference in climate change. As a matter of fact, the trend is a very deadly one for our children and our grandchildren. But the President removed us from the Paris Agreement. We're the only country that has fallen out of it, but we're a leader. We ought to be a leader in this respect. Then he took us out of a TPP agreement, the Pacific Trade Agreement. This was important because it included China and Japan, Australia, lots of countries out there that are very important trade partners and so forth. The fact that we left it means that China is the leader and has great advantages now in the trade situation in the Pacific. Then coming back here to our continent, we got into scuffles with the NAFTA, North American Free Trade Agreement, with Canada and Mexico, and those dialogues still continue on as to how we will be involved with that. I was encouraged that with the tariffs the President just invoked, that Mexico and Canada, for the time being at least, are going to be exempt from that, but we don't know for sure how long as the NAFTA thing goes on. In short, these are very important foreign policy security agreements covering a gamut of subjects. And I'm concerned about that. I believe that our leadership role in the world really demands that we be really upfront in each of these situations of international dialogue. I hope we will be, that the President will change his mind in due course. I have no idea how we're going to come out with these tariffs now. I read, as many of you did today, that we're going to put heavy tariffs on China. And that will clearly be a shot across the bow with a great power. Hard to tell, really, what the reactions will be of the Chinese. But many believe that the reactions will not be good. That essentially it means that the price of vehicles, of consumer goods, of lots of things are going to go up because the Chinese will retaliate with tariffs, as will others, as a matter of fact. And therefore governments will be collecting a lot of money from consumers that will be paying more. So hopefully we've seen the worst of this, but I'm just prayerful at least we make a turnaround into leadership in this area.
Probably the foreign policy issue that has been of greatest concern in terms of it being sort of a flashpoint is our policy vis-a-vis North Korea. And there does seem to be some indication in recent weeks of some thawing there, some efforts to reach out, not just between the United States and North Korea, but between North Korea and South Korea. So comment, if you would, on that arena, our relations with North Korea.
Very hard to tell how that is going to progress. I have friends who have been very much involved with North Korea, South Korea diplomacy. They indicate, for example, that on the day that this whole story broke, that the South Koreans who came to the White House did not have a letter from North Korea. They simply had word that the North Korean leader was interested in doing this. And the President seized the opportunity, burst into a room where there were press people, and made another announcement that he was prepared to meet with the North Korean leader. Well, the North Korean leader hasn't indicated that he won't meet with the President, but at the same time, this does not follow the normal pattern in which the President would have had a Secretary of State or would have had ambassadors who would have been working out the details of where they would meet, what the agenda would be, how it would get underway, and so forth. In other words, all the homework just simply hasn't occurred. So as a result, right now the presumption is that the President is going to meet with the North Korean leader, and that the North Korean leader will make concessions. And the concessions, at least, that we want are that they stop their nuclear program, that they stop testing, and that they, as a matter of fact, wind the whole thing up. Now, there are many who follow North Korea who say that, as a matter of fact, the North Korean leader is dependent upon the nuclear program for his longevity, for his staying in office. This is the way he has beaten down all opponents. He's apparently been responsible, maybe even for the death of some of his family members who challenged his leadership, quite apart from others in the military and so forth. But that this program is the basis for his leadership, and therefore is not likely that it's going to be disposed of, because the United States believes that they ought to give it up and forget about it. We have no idea when a meeting might occur, quite apart from where it might occur, or who might really show up for it. But at the same time, it's encouraging, at least in a way, that there is discussion of such negotiations. And I'm hopeful that things will proceed in ways that they need to. As I mentioned earlier on, one of the problems with the administration is we don't have an ambassador to South Korea right now. We have so many holes in our own structure that we are not really quite prepared for dialogue, at least in that particular area. And it's not really clear whether the president is prepared. Now, we really must hope that he will be. That this is going to take a good bit of schooling and academic work to find the background of all of this, find out how you formulate a treaty and the observation that will be required. For the time being, however, the United States and many countries are putting economic sanctions on North Korea. They are hurting North Korea. The population on a per capita basis is getting much less money. There is some pressure on the North Korean leader on that basis. And that may be the reason that, given the Olympics, over there, the Winter Olympics, that he gave some indication that he might be prepared to have a conversation.
Another foreign policy arena that has been of great accomplishment for you is in arms control and disarmament. And actually this brings up a little bit of what we were talking about earlier in terms of bipartisanship. You worked closely with Senator Sam Nunn, yes, Democrat from Georgia, to produce some of the most consequential both domestic policy and foreign policy as it relates to disarmament, and it resulted in the destruction of, I believe, something like 7,600 nuclear warheads. We don't hear a lot about disarmament and arms control these days. Other issues have pushed that off the front page. Could you comment on that? Is that an arena where there is still great progress to be made? Are you confident that we're going to be able to continue the momentum that goes back to your days in the Senate?
Well, at the time that Sam Nunn and I formulated the arms control, the non-Lugar Cooperative Threat Reduction Program, we had become acquainted over a 5-year period of time with a number of Russians. We met in Geneva, Switzerland, where President Bush asked us to go over what he hoped would be arms control negotiations starting out with the Soviet Union. It didn't work out in 1986. It wasn't until 1991 when some of the Russians came to us, and we met in Sam's office on a round table, and they told us a pretty shocking thought, that we were in trouble. And I asked why, and they said, well, because essentially the nuclear weapons that are aimed at all of your cities, all of your military installations, the soldiers that were guarding those weapons are deserting. We have no money to pay them, and the possibilities are that other foreign forces or others could get in there and they could fire off some of these weapons, and you could be in real trouble. And so I asked, during that conference, what do you want from us? And they said, we want a lot of your money because we're bankrupt. We need your scientists to come over here and take down the weapons and begin to take the nuclear material out of it. And this was the beginning of a 20-year period of time in which Sam and I had to get money from the Congress each year to continue getting our military people and our scientists over into Russia to take down the weapons periodically and systematically to reduce them We had then treaties with Russia, START treaties, that made both sides level on the way down. So we started somewhere around 10,000 warheads each. These were warheads that were larger than those that hit Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I was shocked when I first got into this, as mayor of Indianapolis, to think, was Indianapolis in the gun sight? And we sure were. And one of these weapons would have knocked us all out. We were in that kind of a world. Now, we got this through several arms control treaties down to 1,550 in the so-called New START Treaty, which was the last time we negotiated with the Russians. We've not negotiated anything since. As a matter of fact, Putin said he didn't want to negotiate anymore. He didn't want the Americans around. And we're at a period of time, and I'm not in a position to know precisely what I'm talking about here, so take this but it appears that there is some movement on the part of the United States to say we need to develop smaller nuclear warheads for so-called tactical warfare. In other words, the big ones we had that would knock out a whole city or a military installation are not what we want to have. We need to have something that you can fire on a battlefront with particular. And we know that the Russians are developing similar weapons. And so, in a way, both countries are back at it again, but with much smaller, less consequential weapons, at least one by one. But if this is the strategy, we're heading toward more trouble, quite apart from whatever North Korea is doing, or Iran has been stopped from doing temporarily, or so forth. Russia and the United States are the big nuclear powers. And the question now will be, to what extent are we refurbishing our stock, and the Russians likewise, with no negotiations really on the table? There's been no proposal by President Trump, and certainly not by President Putin. Somehow or other, we got the Lugar thing going largely because that was the year the Soviet Union collapsed. And about 3 months after Lugar passed, the Soviet Union was gone. So they needed our help, really, to control Ukraine, right, Belarus, Kazakhstan, others at that point. The world is different now, and so far the pressures are not the same.
I think it'd be fair to say that the accomplishments that you and Senator Nunn and those you worked with were greater than many people thought would be possible when you began that work. So congratulations to you and those that you worked with to make this a safer world. We heard in the introduction that you are active, and it is in fact your name that the center carries, in the Luger Center. And I went to the website and found some information about the Luger Center, and from the website it notes that the Luger Center is dedicated to proposing solutions to global problems that will define the 21st century. Also, that global and domestic problems do not pause while we struggle with partisan divisions in our own political system. What sort of innovative solutions is the Luger Center considering as ways to affect positive change globally and domestically?
Well, first of all, we've established, as I've mentioned already, the bipartisan index in which we're rating all the members of Congress. And so we brought this to the fore. Many papers throughout the country are interested in how their members are doing on this, how the Lugar Center rates them. Mm-hmm. And a good bit of editorial writing about this. Many members of Congress now, if they have reasonably good ratings, point this out, that the Lugar Center rated them here and there, because it's an indication that they are people who are constructive, who are getting together, who are trying to make things move, and so forth. On more substantive situations, however, we're working on world food security. We have some members in our Lugar Center who are former staff members in the Agriculture Committee that have been working with food aid problems for a long time. And the Gates Foundation has done a great job in this area. Some others have likewise. But we're trying to work with the Congress, and we've had some success in terms of getting more food programs and more aid in those directions. And likewise in helping farmers in those countries that really need to have production. And so I'm encouraged by this. We have, in all of our Luger Center situations, support from foundations that provide really the money to do these things and who have an interest in these situations. We likewise are continuing to work on arms control situations. I had a visit with my friend Sam Nunn yesterday, as a matter of fact, who was in town. We're going to visit also with Bill Perry, former Secretary of Defense, who's done a great deal of work in this area. And we're trying to think through how we might begin to bring together, perhaps, some Russian legislators with American legislators. We might get some folks beginning to meet again. Sam and I met with these people for 5 years before we did non-Lugar. But there's none of this going on right now. There's no relationship at all, and that's not good. So quite apart from whether Putin and Trump are meeting or dealing with each other, conceivably, we may at least in the lower ranks begin to get some folks who are going to be leaders coming on to see really what the situation is and how there could be some degree of cooperation in that area.
Senator Lugar, you've had quite a career in public service, mayor of a great city here in Indiana, U.S. Senator. We've heard about some of the work you've done with colleagues in the Senate. Could you share with us, in that wonderful, rich history that you've had of public service, some of the more memorable moments that to you are perhaps defining moments in your career, or which you will always cherish as you think about your career in public service?
Well, I have maybe two thoughts in that area. I served from the beginning on the Agriculture Committee of the Senate because I've been interested in farming. My dad was Purdue agriculture graduate, bought the 604-acre farm we have back in the 1930s. He passed away 50 years ago, so I've been managing it for the family in the meanwhile. And the thing my dad was always so concerned about was that in Franklin Roosevelt's administration, he was trying to get the price of corn, beans, and wheat up. And so as a result, the administration restricted the amount that you could plant. This was an unusual way of doing it by supply and demand, that you curtail supply to the American public as opposed to the rest of the world with the hope that that will get the price to go up. In any event, this went on for a long while. My dad was furious. Whenever he saw a Roosevelt dime, he would slam it down on this. And we go through this. But when I had an opportunity, became chairman of the Agriculture Committee. Then I worked with Pat Roberts, who was then representative. Now he's Senator Pat Roberts of Kansas, over in the House side. And we produced the Freedom to Farm bill. And this was the first liberation of farmers. From that point on, as a farmer, I could plant as many acres of soybeans as I wanted to, or corn, or beans. In other words, these marketing judgments became mine as a farmer. It was a revolution in American agriculture, which is extremely important, I believe. The other point that I already have talked about was really this meeting around the table with Sam Nunn and with the Russians. This was totally unexpected, that Russians would come to the two of us. It was so unexpected that for a while President Bush was maybe not amused. I never have talked to him about this, but I had the impression that he felt that the President is the commander-in-chief, that he appoints the Secretary of State and Defense and so forth. And here are Sam and Dick dealing with the Russians and working out arms control and so forth. So as a result, after we got the thing passed, we took a trip. We invited members of the administration. General Burns was in the White House, I remember, came over, Bill Perry was on the plane, and a good number of other people. And as I said, we all got religion together. Mm-hmm. we saw what was going on in Russia, in Ukraine, and Belarus right off the bat. And everybody was convinced that this was something that was very, very important to pursue. But it was totally unexpected that two senators would get this thing going, persuade the administration. The Russians came over, of course, be prepared to be persuaded. But I always will remember that point in my life as a legislator.
We'll turn to the audience in a moment, but let me ask you one final question. During the course of the day today, we've had a number of opportunities to talk about the attitudes that people have toward their government and whether or not they're optimistic or pessimistic as we move forward. And you had a chance to meet with quite a number of University of Evansville students, and you related to me afterward how impressed you were with them, how engaged they were. What words of advice or wisdom might you offer to those young people, especially to those who may be coming from groups that previously haven't been particularly well represented in the political process? I think women, I think of minority groups, others. You look at this room, we have these flags representing the countries of the students that come to the University of Evansville. We live in a world rich with diversity. As those young people want to leave their imprint on their societies, on their governments, whether it's in this country or others, what words of advice, as someone who's had a long and distinguished career of public service, would you give to them as they consider that as a path forward for themselves?
Well, first of all, my advice is to be good students, and that is to really work hard, to be academically sound, to get the background information that is available here at the University of Evansville and elsewhere for that matter. Secondly, develop skills in public speaking. Be able to express what you feel. I had great opportunities when I was at Denison to be on the debate team. And I had to be concise because there would be a 10-minute beginning and then a 5-minute rebuttal and back and forth and so forth. And so as a result, I began to develop really in my own mind A, 1 and 2, or B, C, D, or what have you. In other words, organize so that I could make presentations as concisely and to the point as possible. Likewise, to take advantage of the school newspaper or any other situation, op-eds in papers if you don't have a paper. Learn to express yourself on paper. In other words, having done the homework, done the work at least where you have something to say, learn how to say it, learn how to write about it. And then finally, think through really both the joys and the hazards of politics in terms of actually attempting to win office so that you could get something done, but to have something to do before you start. In other words, to have some points of your agenda, to have looked at them soundly, to be very convinced that this is going to advance your community or your state or your country, as the case may be, so that you are convincing. And to be prepared, really, to do the work that's involved, which is the door-to-door visiting with all sorts of people, the fundraising that's required, the elements of politics to be a successful candidate. So we talked about all those things this afternoon. And I think many of the students look to me as if they are alert to the possibilities they have, and I'm grateful for that.
One of the things that the Senator and I talked about when he first arrived on campus was the nature of an education at a school grounded in the liberal arts and sciences like the University of Evansville. And as you heard from the introduction, the Senator was an undergrad at Denison University in Ohio, a small liberal arts school. I've been on the Board of Trustees there for how many years?
52.
52 years on the Board of Trustees. You've outlasted a president or two during that time. But his comments were really a ringing endorsement of the kinds of habits of the mind and skills that one develops at a place like the University of Evansville. And it's so gratifying to hear the words of really affirmation that you offered to me today about what happens at a place like the University of Evansville. So thank you for that.
Well, this is really so important. As we discussed earlier today, Mr. President, many people are worried about the liberal arts college. They feel that right now folks need to be job-oriented, and that means an engineering background or a statistical degree or something of that variety. And those are important aspects. But I think this university, as well as Denison, are developing ways in which there is much more mentorship by faculty and by others on campus, in which there are more internships, or at least some type interplay with various community people in the process of all of this. And this goes on really throughout the 4 years, not just simply in the senior year as people are getting ready to go to work. As a result, this is leading, and you have some good data for University of Evansville, we have a Denison, to the large number of graduates who are employed, who are earning very substantial sums of money by the time they've been out 3, 4, 5 years, and yet had a background in the liberal arts of learning the beauty of art, of literature, of thinking, of theology, of really how to live a good life.
Well, your life and your career is exemplifies what one can do with an educational foundation like you have had. So thank you very much. Please. We have a bit of time for questions that you might have for the senator, and we have a microphone, I believe, available. Here we go. Thank you. And so I see a hand right here on the aisle.
Hold it close to my mouth. Okay. When the Soviet Union broke up, the North Koreans hired a bunch of experts on nuclear matters and that. And I wondered if you made an accounting of nuclear weapons that might have exchanged hands to the North Koreans during this time. And it doesn't quite seem to add up how much nuclear material they have and the weapons they're blowing up with, or they're testing with now. And I wondered if you had an opinion on that.
Let me respond by saying that we were never able to come down to such accuracy as to where everything went. We worked with the Russians to try to make certain that the warheads came off of the missiles, that the missiles were destroyed, that the warheads, you took the nuclear weapon or powder, whatever, out of the warheads. But the facts are that we have no census of exactly where all of the parts are gone in this respect. Therefore, material could have gone to North Korea, could have gone elsewhere. Depends upon, I suppose, two things: whether Russia wanted it to go, or whether somebody stole it. And there were periods of time in which, perhaps in parts of the Soviet Union, there was not that much control. And that's why they called upon us to begin with, because the guards were gone. They were afraid people were going to take it away, who are coming in from other countries.
Other questions?
Thank you, Mr. Lugar, for being here. I've followed you for years. There's so many things I would like to ask you, but I dare say I'm going to ask you what makes more sense to me than not. This is about making sense of current affairs. I'm trying to make sense of life. Life is a lot of stress for lots of people. And the more I hear the news, the more I want to get away from all that, because they're talking about democracies being threatened all over the world. And I am concerned about values. If you stand for faith, you're criticized. So I do know that you're a minister as well as other things, and well-known and well-respected. Can you tell a little bit more about what you just said about values and living out those values? Because wherever we are with that, I think that's how we make sense of life. Thank you. Will you help me, please?
Well, I would just commend once again, as we already were discussing with the President, the value of liberal arts education, the values of really thinking about a life well lived and how best to do this, sort of information and guidance you give to your children, your great-grandchildren, now in my case. I would just say that we're always going to have problems in this respect. We are human beings. We have difficulties. But at the same time, if we have a very good educational background, Likewise, it's very helpful to have a strong religious faith combined with that. And we have love for other people, especially for our spouses and our families. And then we're at least on the right track for the potential for a good life. The fact is, around our country now, many people feel that things have not gone well for them, that good things in life have passed them by. In some cases that people have been very unfair to them, that they are isolated in situations in which they don't have hope and so forth. We are not unique in that respect. Those of you who read about foreign affairs know that you have waves of so-called populism in Western Europe. We have a great number of countries, as a matter of fact, that are rejecting democracy, heading toward a so-called strong leader who can govern, as opposed to all of the difficulties of legislative lack of achievement or difficulties of that sort where people don't particularly have any particular principles. I've been astonished really just in the past week with the word that President Xi in China has obtained a change in the Constitution, and so he could be ruler for life. There is no term limit there. Likewise, President Putin, upon his election with 73%, he was asked about Xi's situation, didn't deny that that's a possibility in Russia likewise. Might just be there as long as he wants to for life. That's a change with major leaders of that variety, but it's occurring in countries that are much smaller, in which essentially the legislative process has been thrown overboard. And this is with sometimes the support of the population or of elements of it that feel that they've been passed by people who have been dealing in the government. And they really want a strong leader who somehow will control all of this. So I'm not predicting this is a dim period for democracy. I'm just observing there are specific cases of this that are disturbing.
Another question.
I want to thank you for being a senator that Indiana voters could be proud of, both Democrats and Republicans.
Thank you.
Real quickly, my question will be to pick your brain and say, who are you watching today in the Senate that you believe is exercising the statesmanlike presence that's eschewing party when need be and acting like you did as a statesman and speaking to all Americans and not just their parties?
Well, I think of John McCain. Of course, John has health problems now and is probably in the process of retiring. I've been impressed by Senator Corker of Tennessee, who has been chairman of the Foreign Relations Committee. But he's retiring, likewise, unfortunately. I've been impressed with Susan Collins of Maine. She has offered really great courage and bipartisanship and has spoken out on a great number of occasions. Very active person. And interesting enough, is always in the top 5 in our Lugar index in the Senate. And I appreciate likewise Lamar Alexander of Tennessee, who has worked sometimes with Susan and with others. I think he does a reasonably impressive job there. I suppose if I thought carefully, I would think of a good many more who really are important factors in a situation that is highly partisan and in difficult shape. I hope that there will be many more coming along because we will need them with so many seemingly in retirement. I've been impressed recently. Jeff Flake of Arizona was not always a substantial leader in the Senate, but he certainly has been speaking out, but once again, headed for retirement. And that seems to be the case with many people now finding themselves a statesmanlike situation, but not headed for a re-election campaign, because they don't really have the backing of the party, of the campaign money that they would need, quite apart from divisions with the president.
Senator, thank you for your comments tonight. I was wondering if you could comment a bit on the militarization of U.S. foreign policy. It'll only be another year or two here when we'll have students who were born after September 11th and hence were born into a world where the U.S. has been continually at war. And for all of President Obama's talk of diplomacy, he escalated the drone program, and for all of President Trump's early talk about reining back in U.S. military adventures abroad, he's escalated U.S. military strikes in his first year. And so I was wondering if you think that anytime soon our students will see a year where the United States is not launching military strikes abroad, and what implications that has for U.S. foreign policy.
Well, we might see such a time if we came to conclusions about what our strategy would be in most of the instances where we're involved in the Middle East. For example, I'm not going to hop aboard the criticism that we have no strategy in Syria, but I don't think we do. I'm doubtful about what we're thinking about Afghanistan or Iraq. I'm not certain really where we stand in a whole host of those situations that make up the Middle East or expand out of that presently. That is a great concern because we have troops in those countries. They're not in large numbers, and so the idea is that we don't want to withdraw and be accused of simply bailing out. On the other hand, we're not certain really what our troops are supposed to do or how they really are going to make a difference there. We're sort of holding tight for the moment. We have a remarkable Navy from the standpoint of our fleet. That's a strong point, that we control the seas as much as anybody ever has, and that we have really the ability, given our submarine fleet, to strike by use of any sort of weapons. Bill Perry, for example, has suggested that our nuclear situation ought to be wound up that's apparent on the ground, where it could be struck by somebody else, and have all of our nuclear weapons at sea in submarines that literally have total mobility, for example. We haven't gone that route, but we might at some point. I'm just trying to answer your question, I suppose, by sort of going over the fact that we are, I don't believe, as well organized in terms of the use of our forces and troops as we need to be. And I'm hopeful there will be coming into the administration people who are more gifted in formulating strategy and in thinking about how the resources that go into our Defense Department ought to be utilized.
Are you concerned about the churn in the administration in terms of the ability to bring people in? You've talked several times about our policymakers being educated about important issues, whether it's domestic or foreign policy. There seems to be such a high rate of turnover that that kind of learning on the job can be short-circuited. Is that a concern?
Yes, of course it is. Because first of all, many of the people that have come in to begin with did not have a substantial background in what they were doing. Now, then you have the impression that they began to learn a good bit more about the situation. And once they were more confident in what they had learned, then they began to suggest to the president that we ought to be doing this or that. Well, frequently the president says, no, we're not going to do that. I don't disagree with you altogether. Well, you're really in a problem situation then. You have been attempting to get ready to do your job and move up to that point, and suddenly you're stopped. So either you resign, or the president suggests you resign, and we move on to somebody else who may likewise not be that well prepared. I'm not certain whether the president and the people that are trying to help select folks really understand this exactly. I think they're still looking for people that they believe are loyal, that have some skills. Certainly our Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, was a very talented man. He did a great job for ExxonMobil for many, many years. And that took him all over the world, so he had a lot of contact with people in other countries. But at the same time, even Rex seemed to be of a mind that in the State Department, too much money was being spent, that foreign aid programs ought to be cut back, food aid programs ought to be cut back, that we didn't need all these assistant secretaries. It was an unusual situation there in terms of a State Department that was very weakened by really lack of having talented people around, and not very many ambassadors going abroad. And finally, however, he left because he got into crosshairs back and forth with the president. The president wants somebody else who he likes better. So that's not an answer exactly to the question, but it's an example of what is occurring in my judgment.
We have time for one more question. If someone would like to take advantage, yes, please. If we could get a microphone. Oh, I'm sorry. I pointed there and the mic was going there. I apologize for that. Yeah, thank you.
Do you think that the European Union is viable? And is the Soviet, or is Russia helping or hurting that viability?
I believe the European Union is viable. I believe it's been under great stress. And in part, this is because many of the nations have been going through these populist revolts. Now, as it turned out, in France, the populists lost. In Germany, they weakened Angela Merkel a great deal, although she's managed to hang on for another term. And these are two countries we've counted on to be sort of the basis of European Union. Clearly, the Brexit vote in Great Britain was a real blow to the European Union, and I think a blow to Great Britain, too. I don't know whether there'll ever be another vote on it, but for the time being, that's a very sad situation at that part of the European Union. And it's encouraged other nations to think about having Brexit-type votes. That would be potentially debilitating to the European Union if countries began to have referendum.
And I will, because I pointed in the wrong direction. One final question.
Thank you. Senator Lugar, I love to read. What are some of the best books on politics or political philosophy that you would recommend?
Goodness. Well, you have me stumbled for a moment. I've been reading so many books, but they've often been really just to get up to speed on particular subjects. They were not really my choice. It's just to relax and sit back and enjoy. It's been a while, really, come to think of it, that I read a book that I would recommend widely to lots of other people. So I'm sorry to be such a non-scholar on that.
Senator, what a terrific evening this has been. Thank you so much for sharing.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Let's see. Been settling in the chair for so long. Thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you. Thanks very much.
And thank all of you for being here with us this evening. Please come back often. As you heard, the Snyder Lecture Series is free to the public. whenever we have another Snyder lecturer, so I hope you can attend at future sessions, and please travel safely.
Great. Thanks so much. Great.